Hello and welcome to the Awakened Feminine podcast. I'm your host, Kaki Lee, a mindset coach and healer who's on a mission to share the love and wisdom of inspiring women from around the world who have gone through adversity and turned their pain into purpose. Today, I'm excited to share the love and wisdom of Rebecca-Anuwen, a modern day witch, author of the Shero Archetypes, and kinesiologist who is joining me all the way from England. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Awakened Feminine podcast. So, the first question I usually like to ask my guests before we dive into your journey is I really love you to share what your definition of an awakened feminine is.
Yeah, for me, when I think about the idea of an awakened feminine person, it's very much about somebody being really comfortable in their skin, to have that presence, to have that energy of trust, to really know themselves and what's important to them. So regardless of what's going on in the world around them, they're still very clear on who they are, and they're making those choices from a place of power rather and like who they want to be rather than shoulds, expectations, or like cowering to other people's judgments. So that's for me what I feel an awakened woman is.
Yeah, and such a beautiful definition because, yeah, when you're in your power, it's just such a beautiful thing when you just let go of everyone's shoulds, as you say. Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
it's like that full acceptance of who you are
Yeah,
and all of the past. It doesn't mean you have to celebrate all of the past, but we do have to accept it so that we can move forward feeling more, I guess, more whole. But it's like when there's something from the past that we're like that we judge as bad or feel shame towards, it's always with us, and it's not
yeah.
as though that we have to accept and celebrate it, but it's like there's nothing left in the closet that is holding us back. There's no stories. So yeah, it's just like being embodied and fully present.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for that definition. So, Rebecca, I really love to start sharing your journey with us.
Mm,
So, I've had an energy session with you and it was absolutely amazing. And I'm looking forward to like my future sessions with you. So,
thank
I want
you.
to ask you, what was it that led you down the path of becoming the witch, the author, and the kinesiologist, where you are today? What was that path? What was that
Yeah,
journey? How did that journey look like?
very windy. I think it's a very windy path. I didn't go to school and think, do you know what, I want to be a witch when I grow up. But as my life has generally unfolded, and I guess I've always been very open to following the calls and following the intuitions. And I grew up in Cornwall. For you might not know that if you don't live in the UK, but it's like the part of the Southwest Peninsula in the UK, and it's full of pirates and myth and story. And if you growing up in Cornwall, it's like the mist comes in and you can't see anything, and then just as quickly it rolls out, and it gives place to this really rich heritage. And in amongst that is like witchcraft and folklore. So in my hometown, there were lots of people, maybe not lots, is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but I knew quite a few people that identified as witches. And one of my mum's closest friends, I used to stay with her a lot when I was younger, and she identified herself as a white witch. And I don't think we'd use that term anymore, but I understood the context because I was probably about 8 when she
Yeah.
described herself as that. And it's like the good witch, isn't
Yeah.
it? But and that was my first introduction to like the energies and
Yeah.
being more than just physical beings. Now, of course, at that young age, I didn't really understand what was going on, but I'd had an insight into a different world that was awakened. And then when I was probably, I think, 19 or 20, I'd always had really clear skin as a teenager. I'd never even had a spot. And then I think at like 19 or 20, suddenly I'd moved place in the UK, and my face, my arms, and my legs were red raw and weeping with like the worst kind of eczema that I'd ever seen. And I was like, oh my God. And so that was 20 something years ago. And I didn't really know what was available. So I went to the doctors and they were like, oh, you've got it bad, haven't you? And I was like, oh, I have, yes.
Yeah.
And it was really sore. And they gave me antibiotics because I thought I might have septicemia because it was so bad.
Yeah.
And they gave me all sorts of creams and emollients, and it was just horrible. and nothing, it wasn't making any difference. I was just getting red and redder. My skin was still weeping. And I cut out dairy, I cut out sugar, I cut out wheat, I drinking aloe vera juice, I was guzzling evening primrose oil, all the things that we were told we should be doing.
Yeah.
And nothing was changing my skin whatsoever. And a friend of mine said, go and see a kinesiologist. And I was like, oh, what? How do you even say that word?
Yeah.
And begrudgingly, I went along because I had nothing else to do. And I remember laying on the couch and she was wiggling my arm and she was asking questions and asking me to think things and placing little vials of flower essence or foods or whatever on my stomach. And I just remember laying there going, really? How's this going to help my skin?
Yeah.
And I was completely skeptical. She was a lovely lady. And I left there going, thanks. I won't, thinking to myself, I won't be back.
Yeah.
And within a couple of days, my skin stopped weeping. I was still bright red and shiny, so much so that everyone was staring at me because I looked like a burns victim.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh my God, if that's all that happens, I'm super, super grateful, because I was having to change my clothes 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to go back. Because even my skeptical self couldn't dismiss the fact that I'd had a session a couple of days later, my skin cleared up, started to clear up. So I went back and finished the course of treatment and my skin has never flared up again in that 22 years now. And I was like, I was skeptical. I didn't believe in it. I thought it was a load of nonsense. I have to go and learn how to do that. Yeah. So I put myself on the very next training course and spent the next 2 years learning the art of muscle testing and understanding what she had done to identify what the imbalance within me was, because it wasn't food. It wasn't what people often would associate with like eczema. And so I started back then. That was quite spectacular, and you'd be in like the local press, girl clears up eczema. And so I had a full clinic of people coming to see me for eczema, IBS, allergies, and they would come to me because they thought they had an allergy like I did, when I cut out the wheat and the sugar. And people would come to me thinking they had allergies, and actually when I was testing, the majority of case, like 95% of the women who were coming to see me did not have allergies. It was, on the outside, everything looked amazing. They had the careers, the families, the holidays, the cars, everything looked as it should, air quotes, on the outside. But actually inside, they were screaming because it wasn't the life that they wanted for themselves. And so I very quickly realized that the skin eruptions, the bowel explosions, all holding, the sneezing, all of that irritated energy, all of that repulsion energy was the socially acceptable way of these women's bodies saying, stop, you're betraying yourself. And so it was easier for them to say, oh yeah, I've got really bad eczema, or I've got really bad IBS, rather than saying, actually, I want a divorce, actually, I want a career change. And so from there, my work's evolved, working with, like, I suppose what you would call the awakened woman, as the women are going, oh, hang on a minute, you mean that little voice inside me, that's valid, and I shouldn't feel guilty for having what people would love, but I don't want it. Because that was the other thing, these women would feel guilty for not appreciating what they had more, even though it wasn't what they wanted. So that's how I kind of evolved into the kinesiology, and everything else has just come. And I think with the witchiness, I've always had that about me. If you're watching the video, I have a bit of a witch nose, and I have a mole on my face. I feel like I'm like the archetypal witch anyway. And I think for me, the witchcraft is that wise woman energy. It's that woman who's sovereign to herself. In the fairy tales, the fairy tales I grew up with, it was the powerful women, the evil stepmom and the wicked witch. It was the women who knew what they wanted, albeit she wanted Snow White's beauty, or she wanted the children. I'm not saying it was, socially acceptable what they wanted, but they knew what they wanted, and they would do anything to get it. And they were the villains. And I think still today we carry that archetypal pattern of can't be selfish. I can't just prioritize myself. That makes me evil or wicked, or the evil stepmom or the wicked witch. And I think really it's about reclaiming that inner sovereignty, that inner authority, but also tapping into the awe and the magic that surrounds us. Because I do love a witch's tool. have quite a few cauldrons just in this office alone,
Uh-huh.
and I have wands and all sorts of things. But really, as much as I love all of that, I really do believe that the magic is within. And for me, that idea of being a witch is just awakening that inner magic and tapping back into the cycles that are within us and around us. So it's quite a long-winded way to answer your
Yeah, no,
question. But
it's such a cool story though. It's such a cool story. So I want to ask you, like with your
Mm,
kinesiology and your witchcraft, do you
mm,
blend them together to in your
absolutely.
work? Yeah.
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 Because for me, again, if you think of the idea of a witch, really, I love the term witch, kind of, I don't know, because it's a little bit edgy, I suppose. But also, there's a lot of people that don't like the word witch. And for me, it is a signal to tell other people, it's like, if you want to have those conversations, I'm a safe person to have that conversation with, because I'm claiming the title witch. Weird things happen to you, you want to share it, that's fine. I'll have that conversation, and I'll hold
Yeah.
that space. You've had a session with me. The conversations can go wherever they end up going, and there's
Yeah.
absolutely no judgments, like, oh, I'm feeling this now, and that's just how it works. But really, for me, the kinesiology, it brings us back into center with who we are. It clears away all of the stories, I would call them spells, like the judgments, the expectations, the societal standards, the cultural expectations. They're the spells that have us enchanted. And I see the kinesiology as breaking those spells so that actually we can come back to ourselves. Because if women, I think one of the most powerful things I find about magic is it's a tool to create change.
Yeah.
We can only create real lasting change if we're clear on the change we want to create. So if you're not happy in your life, it's great to know you're not happy, but what is it you actually want? Because when you're clear, when you can hear that inner wisdom, when you have that knowledge from within, and the kinesiology helps to clear the shoulds and the expectations and get you back to that clarity, well, then you can make magic that creates real change.
Yeah.
Because magic is just directing energy. People do it all the time with affirmations or with vision boards. It's all just magic. It's all just directing energy, except in the world of witchcraft, it comes with it's a bit more, I suppose, more of a lifestyle. It's not just like, oh, I'm going to do a vision board and that's it.
Yeah.
It's like in the witchcraft, you like making a cup of tea in the morning and you're staring your intentions into the tea, and then you maybe light a candle, setting your intention again. And they're all just anchors into your own intentions. So
Yeah.
it's just a very conscious way of creating change. But then the kinesiology really amplifies that, because it helps you clear your energy, so that energy you're projecting, the intentions you're setting, they're clear, instead of having to go through all the fears and the judgments and the worries about not being good enough, or the can I do this, who am I to do this, what will my family say. The kinesiology clears that out the way, so actually there's that clear route to where you want to get.
Yeah. Beautiful. So Rebecca, I mean, you've worked with so many clients. I want to ask you, what's the
Mm,
top, like maybe top three things that are blocking women? I mean, you work with women like from
yes.
really stepping into their power, and how can people, I guess, what's the word, start bring that awareness so that
Mm,
they can start working on it and step
yeah.
into their power. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the main things that I do a lot of work with fears, and these fears are often set up in childhood. So they just like subconsciously, or sometimes very obviously,
Yeah.
are something that people have to work with a lot of the time. And one of those things is like fear of being abandoned. Or like fear of being rejected. It's that energy of like, if I show up in the fullness of who I am, I'm going to be cast aside. And you could say this goes back to, I would call it the witch wounds, but all of the persecutions that have gone on throughout history. And I read this thing the other day, and it said, it's not witches that were burned, it was women. And it's true, and we carry that in our blood and bone. We carry that in the collective unconscious, that to be a woman that was speaking up was dangerous.
Yeah.
And we still carry that now. And even if you bring it back, so it's not women, it's everybody. It's like when we used to live in, being Celtic of heritage, it would be in clans.
Yeah.
If you stood out, if you didn't toe the line, if you weren't a team player, you'd be ostracized, and that would often lead to death. So we know from a survival point of view, we have to fit in. And it's like, we want to fit in, we want to feel like we belong. So it's like you're with your friends, or you're with your family, or you're at work, and it's always like, who do I need to be right now, instead of who am I? And so that's one of the main things. Women are so good at being chameleons that they've actually forgotten the truth of who they are, or they don't know how to show up in the truth that they are. And it just leads to like frustration and resentment and unhappy relationships, because they're not actually based in truth. The other thing that I see is this idea of power and power dynamics. You know, we live in a world where power is seen as power over. It's like, to get to the top, you trample on everyone else.
Yeah.
And we've forgotten that actually true power comes from within. It's not a zero-sum game. It's not like, if I have power, you can't have any. It's more like the power of the sun. It's like, if the sun shines on me in the UK, I say laughing as if that would happen, and it could shine on you. It takes nothing away from its ability to shine on you. Yeah, it's like, oh, sorry, I can't shine on you today, Rebecca. You know, you've got it all.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not how it works. And power is like that. It's like an inner power. But we have such a warped relationship with power that we think, it upsets me. There's not much that upsets me, you know, but it upsets me when I hear women say, I can't stand in my power, it will hurt other people. Yeah. And it's just like this ingrained belief that if they're powerful, they will hurt other people, because we think of power over other people. And it's like, no, we need that inner sense of power. We need to have that inner sovereignty, that inner authority to make our own choices, instead of giving our power away. Yeah. Everything in life, every interaction we have, every decision we make is an exchange of energy, or, if you will, an exchange of power. And so when you're making that choice, you're giving that power to resentment as much as you could be giving it to love. And it's like, these are all choices we make moment to moment, often subconscious, but it's like, if you imagine you were born with like 100 pounds, dollars, watts of units of currency. It's like, every day you receive units of currency by looking after yourself, maybe by drinking water, exercising, sleeping, meditation, yoga, love, you know, whatever it may be. But also you give away power. So that resentment you're harboring from like 15 years ago might take 20 units of currency for you to nurture. You know, so it's like, we're always giving away our energy. And you see that in the way people talk. They're exhausted, they're depleted, they're burnt out. Our language has changed into a language of power or energy, you know, whichever word resonates more. And I think we forget the importance of that. We just plow on through. We think we can keep taking from our energy and everything will be okay. And then suddenly people crash, they burn out, they're exhausted, they're depleted. And it's usually that moment when people are like, oh, I need some help. Life's not working out how I thought it was. So that's what I see, this very driven idea about power, rather than really embracing the cycles actually that especially women go through. It's like, we ebb and we flow, we take action, we rest, we pause. So those would be the main things that I see. And I think for people to really start working through those, it's about getting really clear on who they are and what they want. And one of my favorite phrases, and I think I say this as a British woman, is I was like, you have to become full of yourself. Yeah. And I know that in the UK, it's like, oh my God, she's too big for her boots. In Australia, you'd have the tall poppy syndrome. In America, it's like being too big for your britches. And it's that energy of, we have to become full of ourselves, even though when I say that to people, first of all, they're like, oh, that's triggering, because that's selfish, that's rude, that's, you know, above your station, whatever, you know, whatever the culture and society has taught you. But you have to be full of your dreams, your desires, your values, your core desired feelings. You have to be full of what you think life should be like. And in people that I work with, I talk about, we create our own life philosophies. It's like to become full of our own selves. Yeah. Because when we don't, we become shells of ourselves. And when we're a shell of ourselves, we have a space inside us where we can collect other people's judgments, other people's expectations, other people's desires for us, other people, what they want for us, even if it's well-intentioned.
Yeah.
You know, because I've no doubt that when our parents put pressure on us to be or have or behave a certain way, it's from well-meaning. But it's from their own fears. They want the best for us, and they see the best of us as being a particular path. And so if we're carrying that energy within us or within our energy system, we make a decision, I'm going to do this. And you take like 3 steps forward and you're like, yay. And then you're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. Perhaps I should do this. Maybe mum and dad were right. Or maybe who am I to think I can do that? And suddenly we start questioning ourselves because we're influenced unduly by this energy that's not ours, these thoughts and feelings that aren't ours. So every day, if people just take a moment, and I always say, like, close your eyes and put your hands over your heart space, because you close your eyes and you cut out the noise around you. You put your hand over your heart space so that you connect with your physical body. And you just ask yourself, what is it I want? What is it I need today? And you might not get the want in that particular day, but you just come back to center just to remind yourself of who you are. Because in a world that's getting busier and busier and busier, noisier and noisier and noisier, it's really easy to get lost, to lose a sense of who you are, because you're just getting through the day, you're just surviving, just one more thing on my to-do list. Oh, I've got to do this now, or the family, or the cooking, or the house, or the work. You know, there's just always something else. And so we can get to the end of the day and be like, oh my God, where's that day gone? Where's that week gone? How was it December? You know. But when we take a moment just to stop and like cut through that noise, to come back to our center, to like fill ourselves up with our own self, really, it's like, oh, okay, this is what I wanted to do. This is the direction I wanted to take my life in. These are the choices I wanted to feel. These are the feelings I wanted more of. How can I foster more of those? And you don't have to eat, pray, love yourself around the world. It's just moment to moment choices.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that, because I remember when I had my session with you, you said to me, you have to become full of yourself, because the things that you mentioned, the fear of abandonment and the fear of that power, that was, what I had to work through as well during the session. And it's such a common thing for women to not want to be better than someone else because they feel bad, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So, and
it's like
you go.
No, sorry, thanks. I was just about to say, it's like we celebrate the women who are selfless. Oh, look at her. She's so kind. She's so generous. She's so busy looking after everyone else. But if you think of the word selfless, who in their right mind would want to be lacking their self?
Yeah.
Because you're just a shell of a person. And it's like, and yet we celebrate that as women. Yep. We're taught to prioritize the needs of other people over our own. And it's like, no, it has to stop. It doesn't make you selfish. It makes you like richer and fuller. If you choose to, it enables you to give more freely from a place of joy and gratitude and fullness, rather than overwhelm, frustration, resentment, and general pissed offness.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, but we have these things like, oh, I can't do something for myself because it's selfish. And really it's selfish not to, because then you just your relationships become miserable, whether it's with like partners, friends, children, everything just becomes antsy, you become irritable, and that's no fun for you, and it's no fun for anybody else in your life either.
Yeah, exactly. And I just remember, when you told me to be full of myself, and I think after my session, I've been very I've had to be in that rest mode where, you're saying it's ebbs and flows. You take the action and you need to have that rest. And it was really going, oh, I actually need to take that rest right now, even though I wanted to do all these things. But now that I've taken that rest, I can actually go out and really put my full self in to take the action, rather than coming from a place of, oh, I need to do this, but I've got so much to do now. It's like, okay, cool. I'm just going to do this because this is how I'm feeling. Yeah.
Yeah. Because everything changed for me when I started to honor my own natural rhythms, because I have a lot of energy. I can go and go and go and go, and then I just crash. I'm like, okay, I've checked out now. But when I can honor those rhythms, it's like, I can remember so many times I'd spend a day and I'd be, right, I'm going to write this thing now. And I'd sit there, I'd type something, and I'd delete it. And I'd stare at my computer screen, and I'd be like, look at the time, and I'd, distract myself with something else, and I'd come back and still not done anything. And by the end of the day, I'd done absolutely nothing. You know, I'd maybe written half a sentence. And it's like, if I'd just given myself permission to have the day off, to go for a walk in nature, to have a sleep even, I would have come back so much refreshed. And, you know, I would have felt really good because I'd had a day off. Instead, I felt resentful because I'd not rested, but I'd also not done anything. I was in this like stupid liminal space where I was like trying to fight with myself to do something. And so these days, I mean, obviously I honor all of my agreements that I've made with people. But there's times when I'm like, oh, I really need to get this done. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm not feeling it today. Don't do it. And I've done that for an entire week before, gone, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to get this work done. And then I'll come back and suddenly I'm like, how did I get all that work done? You know, because I've done what I thought would take me like 2 or 3 days in like 4 hours because my body was ready, aligned, and I'm like, okay, let's go. And it was just done. And so I think because of experience, I really trust that things get done when they're supposed to get done. And sometimes, you know, that's maybe a couple of days later than I had anticipated, but it's always done, but never to the detriment of anybody else. I'm not suggesting like, oh, do you know, they can wait an extra week for it. That doesn't fly in my world. That feels disrespectful. But if it's something that I'm just working on for myself, or if it's like a blog post or something, it's like, it doesn't matter if it goes out on a Tuesday or a Thursday. I just honor my own cycles of, I suppose for me, I'm quite a creative person. So I honor those phases of creativity, whether it's like writing or different times of creation.
Yeah. Awesome. So Rebecca, I want to ask you, can you share with us in this moment, in this current chapter of your life, what is your personal mission?
It's not so much a chapter of my life. This has been kind of my mission for probably like the last 10 years. And it's changed slightly, but it's always the same. And I want women to jump out of bed with a skip in their step and like a yippee, it's another day in their heart, because that's the kind of life I love living. And I'm a very joyful person, and I want that for other people. I don't want people to go through the drudgery of life. And I often, my clients often refer to me as like their fairy godmother, because I want people to feel safe. I want people to be able to express themselves. I want people to be able to trust themselves deeply. So when they hear that intuition, they're like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing today. Oh yeah, I have to reach out to that person. Or, oh, I'm going to go and explore that now. And let it just be normal for them to trust themselves deeply, to be able to trust in something bigger, whatever that may be. And I almost like, I really want that. And people are like, oh, that's so nice. And I'm like, no, it's totally selfish, because I want to live in a world where people are like lit up and turned on and trusting themselves. And there's no power plays or there's no judgments. People are just like, I'm busy being me, join me or ignore me, because someone over there is busy being you. And you can, you know, they're over there being them. So they're going to be them and they can go off their way. And just everyone can just come together and just share in the richness of life. Because I live in the countryside, slightly obsessed by nature, and I often think of life as like a quintessential like country British country garden, English country garden. And there's space for everything. It's like whether you're the daisy or the sunflower isn't better than the daisy. The daisy is perfectly a daisy and the sunflower is perfectly the sunflower. And people are roses and bluebells, and everyone peaks at their own season. And you know, everyone has their own fragrance and their own beauty that they bring. And it's like, some people are sunflowers, let them be sunflowers. Don't try and chop them down for shining so brightly. Some people are daisies. Don't try and drag them out and be taller than they really are designed to be. And it's like, that's what I want for the world, is for people to show up and be more them.
I love that mission.
Not asking much.
not at all. But I just love that mission. And as you're talking, it's just, wow, how amazing would the world be if we just all were happy and lit up and doing the things that we love and really in our power. I mean, that would just be amazing.
When I say, I don't want that to sound a bit saccharine, because I have no issue with women being angry, as long as it's like, oh my goodness, I've forgotten the lady who I first heard use this term. oh, it will come to me in a minute, but she uses the term sacred anger, and I heard someone else use the term righteous rage. They'd heard it from somebody else, and I just love that, because change happens with anger. But so this isn't about everything being love and light. In fact, I don't even really like that term. I think it's quite toxic. But it is about being real. But for me, joy isn't about being happy. Joy is about that inner knowing of who you are and being able to express yourself fully without thinking you have to hide yourself or hide or tone that part down, or I can't have that conversation because what would people think? For me, that joy is that just that expression, that truth of who we are.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. So I want to go a bit more personal with you, if that's okay, Rebecca. Was there a particular experience that you've been through that you found the most challenging, but actually led to your biggest breakthrough?
Yeah, for me, I've always had like abandonment themes in my life, and that started when I was 8. My parents got divorced, and to be divorced these days, it's like, who doesn't know someone that's divorced? But when I was 8, nobody in my hometown that I knew of was divorced. It just wasn't a done thing. And so I didn't really understand what was going on. And I remember it was a very messy divorce. It could have given any like daytime soap a run for its money, but that's probably another podcast. And I remember I really hated my dad. I just felt so much anger towards him for everything that he had done to our family. And I still remember really clearly, I lived in a fishing town, and there was a river in the middle, and I would have to walk up one side of the river, across the bridge, and down the other side of the river to go to my summer job. Everybody had summer jobs in hotels when we were at school. And I was walking down the other side of the river when I was 16, and I remember thinking, oh my God, I hate my dad, but he doesn't know that, because I'd not seen my dad, for well, not for any of that time. And I remember thinking, the only person who is hurting right now is me. And in that moment, it's like all the hate and the anger just dissolved. And I was like, I get to choose how I feel about life. Now, I don't mean like every day I was like plotting his demise, but it's just like, every time I thought about him, I didn't have any nice thoughts about him. But it just suddenly occurred to me, I'd lived half my life without him. I was fine. I was holding this anger and resentment to him. He didn't know. He probably didn't even care that I was holding it.
Yeah.
The only person it was affecting was me. And I was like, oh, okay. And from that moment, it was just like, I get to choose how I feel. And I was like, oh, this is really liberating. And I think from that moment, I guess growing up surrounded by nature, it's like, every day the tide would come in and come out. Twice a year my hometown would flood, and all the fishermen would be making sure their boat stayed in the river and not on the harbour, and where it would cut off parts of the town and you wouldn't be able to get in or out. And so I was very connected to nature and to the seasons and to the cycles without really going, oh, I'm connected to the seasons and the cycles, but it was just like part of my everyday life. And I wouldn't consider people like spiritual. We didn't have like spiritual conversations, but I think there is a different perspective of life when you grow up in that kind of environment. But I do remember that when my friends were reading like Just 17 magazines, I was reading Teach Yourself yoga books, because I knew there was something else that was bigger than me that I didn't have the language for, and that nobody in my family was talking about. So that kind of set me off on my quest. And on that journey of what is out there, what is going on in the world. So that was like one moment that I can really clearly remember. And like I said, I can even remember what I was wearing. But I was walking down and it was like the sun was shining, the river was twinkling, and I just suddenly went, oh, the only person I am hurting is me. Oh, that's not a very wise choice, is it? And it was just like everything just melted away, all of that hate and anger, and that was it.
Yeah. And it's so great you had that 16. There's a lot of people, that's quite a young age to actually recognize that you're just hurting yourself by holding. I mean, there's people.
I don't know where it came from. It was just like whoosh.
Because there's people that are way older that still hold on to anger and, hate and all that kind of stuff. So I want
Yeah.
to ask you, as you're talking, because you said in your hometown it's not very spiritual, you don't have spiritual conversations. And
Yeah.
when you were 8, you said you met, well, you hung out with your mum's friend who
Yeah.
was like, who said she's a witch.
Yeah.
So then how can you share with us, when did your spiritual awakening, I guess,
Yeah.
happen, and what did it look
I
like?
always I always think when I was 16, that was my conscious, oh, I have choices right now.
Yeah.
But you're right. When I was 8, I used to, because my parents got divorced, so I was spending some time with my mum. She was like my, I called her my surrogate mum, and I would go and stay at her home. Now, my mum and years later, my stepdad didn't like me hanging out with her because they thought she was a bad influence on me. But I loved this woman because I guess she treated me like an adult. You know, we'd do art and we'd have like cool conversations. But there was always this one experience. So we were sat in her front room and there was a corner couch, and above us there was this wrought iron light that had a pull chain to turn it on and off.
Yeah.
And we were sat there, and you know, I thought it was really late at night, but you know, it could have been like 8 o'clock in the evening, who knows. But you know, in my memory,
Yeah.
you know, the lights were down low, that had this like one lantern light above us, and we were just sat there chatting and like reading, and suddenly the light went out, and I said, oh, we need to go and change the bulb. And she went, oh no, she goes, it's been turned off. And I looked and I was like, it's above us, the chain is there, there's no one else in the house, it's the two of us. And she went, no, it's been turned off. And I was like, no, the bulb's gone. And she said, no, there's spirits with us right now. She said, but they're just passing through. She goes, it's nothing to worry about, they're just letting us know they're here. And I laughed at her. I was like, oh, whatever. She went, turn the light back on. And I pulled the chain and it came back on. And I was like, oh my God. And so we started talking about energies, and at the time I wouldn't have thought, oh, this is the beginning of my spiritual journey. It was just like, wow, that's amazing, because I'd never experienced anything like that. And which is when she started telling me that she was like what she would call a white witch, and how working with like nature and energy and the plants. And at the time I was kind of like, oh yeah, that's cool. But because I was so young, I didn't really take too much of it on. By then I don't know, maybe 9 or 10, you know, between like 8, 9 and 10. So it was just like, oh yeah, that's cool. What else should we do now? You know, like what's for dinner? You know, so it's like, that was my introduction to people that believed different things. Because like my family, we weren't overly religious or anything. Apart from when my parents got divorced, my mum made us go to church, and I realized actually that's really hypocritical, because she just, you know, that's great that she needed it, but she only really wanted church, actually went to church in times of crisis. And I remember thinking, it's a little bit hypocritical if you either go to church or you don't. But you know, people deal with things in their own way, don't they? So that was, I guess, my introduction to things that are quite different. Because like in Cornwall we have like the Museum of Witches, which is like one of the few in the country. And like I say, everyone, the King Arthur is there. He is everywhere in the UK though, but particularly in Tintagel and all of those areas. So it's very much rich in like myth and history. And it was just one of those things that was part of my life, but I didn't really give it much thought. You know, it was just like I lived on the beach, and it didn't really dawn on me that everyone would come down to Cornwall to the beach on holiday. It just felt we were permanently on holiday because we'd be on the beach every day. It was just normal. It didn't occur to me that you'd go on holiday to places because everyone came to us. You know? So, but I would say for me personally, it felt like my spiritual like path started when I was about like 16, in particular, with that being a catalyst, because I could consciously choose that. Whereas before it was just like information coming at me, like just like I was reading a book, and I was like, oh, I wasn't scared, I wasn't frightened. I was like, ooh, because she even said to me, she goes, can you feel the energy? And I felt it, and I was like, oh, it feels a bit tingly. And she said, yeah, that's how they let you know they're here. And I was like, oh. But I don't think I even told my friends about it. It was just like, oh, this weird thing happened, and like oh, then I went to bed, you know. So
that's really cool. So I want to ask you, just with you know, what do you believe is like the greatest lesson that you've learned so far in your life?
I think, again, I had that moment at 16, and I was like, oh, I get to choose. And I often say we know things and then we really know things. And I had something happen probably when I was maybe early 20s. And I really understood that actually I get to choose how I feel about anything that's happened in my life. And I was actually on a training course, and something had come up, and they said, you're choosing to feel like that. And I remember all of my heckles going up and being like, thinking to myself, how dare you tell me that I'm choosing to feel this like level of pain or whatever it was. I was like, no, this was done to me. You know, it's like, I'm not choosing this. Who in their right mind would choose to feel this way? And I just remember being really indignant about it and being like really narked off. And it was being a bit of a quick learner. It was about 2 years later, I was like, oh my God, I do get to choose how I feel about situations. And it had taken me all like from that indignation and like, no, and like completely shutting out that idea to being, oh, when events happen to me, I get to choose. Now, if I choose not to be angry or pissed off or upset, doesn't make the other person right. It doesn't forgive them, but it does influence how I react. Sorry, how I respond rather than just unconsciously react. And I think that has probably been my biggest lesson. And I know that when you tell that to people, having been one of them, and they're not ready to hear it, you may as well just be swearing at them. Yeah. And it's like when people used to say to me, I'd be searching for my life purpose. And people would say, oh, the answers are within. I'd want to poke them in the eye. It's like, if I knew the answer, I wouldn't be looking for it, would I?
Yeah.
And yet it's so true. And I often say this to people. I'm like, you know the answer. And I'm like, and I know when I say that, you want to poke me in the eye because I did exactly the same to other people. You know, but we're looking for someone to give us permission to be ourselves. We're looking for someone to give us permission to change path, to like commit to something. And actually we need to give it to ourselves. But we're so frightened of getting it wrong that we want someone else to do it for us. We're like giving away our power, giving away our responsibility. So for me, that biggest lesson is knowing that I get to choose how I respond to people, situations, places. And I have to say, sometimes it's a little bit annoying because sometimes I just want to blame someone else.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, I want to be like, no, it's your fault. And I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I give myself a few moments to feel a bit righteous. And then I'm like, okay, get over yourself. Let's actually sort this out.
Yeah. So, I think it's necessary to have those few moments of righteousness, right?
To be like, I'm gonna sulk for a couple of hours. Or I'm always like, give myself permission. I'm like, okay, you've got 40 minutes to feel sulky, go. And by the time I've done that, I'm like, oh, okay, I realize how silly I'm being. Let's move on. But I think it is good for us to have permission to feel our feelings, for sure. And it's certainly never ever about suppressing them or pretending things are better than they are. But I think part of that is being honest. You know, being honest in, you might not be able to change the situation, you might not have been able to like turn back time, but we can consciously choose how we're going to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, I think everything, you know, happens for us to learn something. So whilst it might be a bad experience, you know, still a lot of gratitude for it happening so that we learn the lessons and then we can keep growing and moving forward. Yeah. So Rebecca, I want to ask you, you know, when you have those down moments, what are some of the tools or teachers that are really helpful in helping you just bring yourself back up and realigning with yourself?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's acceptance. It's like, oh, you feel a bit grumpy today. That's fine. You're allowed to feel grumpy. And by the time I've acknowledged that, I'm like, oh, but I don't like feeling grumpy, so I'm going to choose something else. You know. So for me, it's like allowing myself to feel all of it, the good, the bad, and the indifferent, and to, you know, we are human. I know a lot of people think, you know, we're not, or wish we weren't, but we are human. We are incarnated on this earth in this dense, you know, thick, painful body. And I think just the acceptance of that and knowing that I'm human and knowing that I have feelings. That's what we do. We do it really well, up and down, and then we cycle. Apart from that, though, it's like my go-to is always to get outside and walk. I'm very lucky where I live. I live in the middle of the countryside. And if you've ever been on my Instagram, on my Shero's Journey one, it's like just full of nature pictures. And it's just like, immerse myself in the trees in particular. But there's also a couple of other things that I always get people to do, and one of them, I talk about the power pose. I don't know if you've heard me talk about the power pose, but
No.
I'm like, if you haven't, there's a TED talk by Amy Cuddy that's really worth watching. And a power pose is basically you put your arms in the air and your feet further than hip width apart as you stand up, or put your hands on your hips. So I'm like She-Ra or Wonder Woman, depending on who resonates. And when you do that, you are literally taking up space in the wild. It's like, when you see like cats, they get their hackles up, don't they? Or the cobra, inflates its hood. And it's like we take up space. And as we do this, the science has shown that it lowers the cortisol, the stress hormone in our body, and it raises our confidence. And there's been lots of kind of tests around this about people being more confident and being perceived as more confident. So if I'm like, oh God, I really don't want to, if you just do this for a couple of minutes, your mood will change because of that. So if I'm being particularly petulant, I'm like, right, lady, and you can do it laying on the floor. I have people like, I'm doing it in bed today. I'm like, I don't care where you do it, as long as you do it. And I also have what I call a sacred practice. A sacred is an acronym, and it just goes through 6 steps. Sacred. I did a video about it, and I was like, 5 steps. I'm like, oh no, there's 6. I can count, honestly. But it basically just brings you back into your own energy. It reminds you of who you are, where your edges are, because that's something I think is really important, to know where your edges end and other people begin. So we're not picking up on the soup of the collective or the soup of family judgments and expectations. And it's like just getting back into your own energy and having that clarity of like, oh, what's my next decision going to be? Like, what's that next choice? And you're like, oh yeah, okay, I can move forward from here. Because usually if people are feeling overwhelmed or frustrated, they've just lost their way for a moment. And it's just like aligning with your inner compass to go, oh, that's where I was heading. Yeah. Even if that was to bed, that's fine.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to go to bed and just have a lie down and sleep. Yeah.
And sometimes you need to have a rage, and sometimes you need to have a dance or a drum, or sometimes you need to have like a proper conversation with someone.
Yeah.
It's like, what is it you need in that moment? And it will change moment to moment. If you find yourself heading to the fridge, or you find yourself heading for that glass, or social media, it's like, hang on a minute, what's really going on?
Yeah.
And it's okay to numb out. There's nothing wrong with that. We can do that. Sometimes that's needed. But it's about being honest with yourself and saying, actually, what's really upsetting you here? What actually needs to be addressed?
Yeah. Thank you so much for those. And Rebecca, this year there's been, I mean, a lot of changes around the world. Yeah, understatement.
Yes.
But anyway. And, a lot of, I know that there's a lot of people starting the awakening journey, or, pivoting, changing their careers, whatever it is that they're doing these changes. So, and there's people that want to change but are still feeling very stuck, very scared. So what advice or recommendations would you have for those people that are still in that fear mode, or having, telling themselves that the stories that they can't do it, they shouldn't? How can they take that first step? What's some advice you can give them?
I would say that they're more resilient than they realize. I think it's Glennon Doyle once said, she goes, you've survived your very worst day, you're still here. It's like, we are resilient by nature. And yes, change is always scary. Of course it is. We're stepping into the unknown, and that is far scarier than something that's uncomfortable, because at least discomfort we can cope with, can't we? It was like, oh, we know it's not what we want, but we know what to expect. And so I would, as like we've been talking about, it's like, close your eyes, put your hands on your heart space, and ask yourself, what is it you really want? Not what you think you want, not what you've been told you should want, not what somebody else wants for you, but what do you want? Because I think if nothing else, this year has given people time to assess what's actually important to them, whether it's health, whether it's like, I know quite a few people where they've decided actually they're going to cut their incomes in half, because staying at home with the children is actually far more important than having the bigger house or the second car or the umpteen holidays. They're like, do you know what, we're going to scale right back. And they're very fortunate to be in that position where they can make that choice. Not everyone's that fortunate, obviously, but it has given people a moment to go, oh, this is what's important to me. And I think it's taken us from being like everything to going, oh, well, this is important to me. Well, great, that's a first start. It's like, that's important to you. What else is important to you? And then start focusing on that. You might not be able to just get up and change career or move house, but you can start focusing on what it is you do want in your life. What feelings do you want to experience more of? What values do you want front and center of your life? And then cultivate them. And they will take you. It's like, if you're here and you're making choices unconsciously and you're moving further and further away from what you do desire, but if you're here and you're like, oh, I'm going to choose to feel more of this today, say for example, I don't know, your value might be connection. Oh, so I'm going to reach out and have a real, when I'm speaking to my friend next, I'm going to put my phone down and I'm going to have an actual conversation with them, maybe over Zoom, but and it's like, or I'm going to write a letter to someone or an email, or I'm going to send that birthday card that I usually forget. And it's like, all of those little choices move you closer towards the life that you already want to be living. And they're choices you can make in the moment. They don't have to be big things, because I flippantly said, oh, you don't have to eat, pray, love yourself around the world. And yet it's very exciting and wonderful to do that.
Yeah.
Not that we can probably travel right now, but people often undervalue what I call soul vitamins. It's like the moment to moment to moment choices that become the foundation of your life. Those moments become your days. Those days become your life. And it's like, if you could just focus on one thing a day, oh, I want more connection, more love, more joy, more freedom, more whatever it is, it starts moving you towards the life of your dreams in really tiny steps. And it doesn't matter if you're sprinting or if you're, when we were kids, we used to call them pigeon steps. You take little half steps. And it doesn't matter as long as you're moving in that direction. There's no race to the finish line. In fact, I often say, it's like the spiritual path is like a spiral path. It's not like from A to B or up to the highest mountain. Yeah. It's an inner spiral path. And the only thing you get by rushing a spiral path is dizzy. You have to take it at your own pace. And sometimes that will be jogging, and sometimes it will be crawling along really, really reluctantly, yeah, but still making those brave choices. And some days it will feel like sprinting, but that's life. Life is not flatlining.
Yeah.
We'd be checked out if it was.
Thank you. That's such great advice. Thank you so much. And so, Rebecca, I want to take a little bit of a turn. So I'm all about self-love, and because that was one of the biggest things that I had to learn on my journey. So as an awakened woman, what are your top 3 go-to activities to make sure you give yourself the self-love that you deserve?
Yeah. So for me, it is about taking that moment. I call it a sacred pause of just going, oh, what is it I need right now? And, some days it is something that looks nourishing and nurturing. Some days it is maybe something that looks a bit more indulgent. Some days it is just like, oh, do you know what? I need to get to bed before midnight. And it's like honoring that, what I actually truly need. It's like, people are often like, oh, I need to win the lottery. And it's like, no, what do you really need? It's like, because winning the lottery would enable you to do something. And what would that be? Maybe it's to feel safe, or great, how else could you make your life feel safe? Go back, and form of self-love for me is trusting myself. And when I talk about trust, I mean becoming a woman of your word. Because when we are honest with ourselves, it's their fault. Oh no, actually I allowed that behavior, didn't I? Oops, that's my fault. I didn't communicate properly, or my expectations were wrong. It's like, when I'm honest with myself, I can trust myself, because we all know people that lie to us. Yeah, that say, oh, I'll definitely be there at 6. I promise I'll be on time this time. And 45 minutes later, you're like, really? You don't trust that person. You might still love them, but you don't trust them the same way, because you're like, oh, it's just them. They're always late.
Yeah.
We know that when people lie to us, we don't trust them. And yet we lie to ourselves constantly. Oh, I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'll keep going. It'll be okay. And that's lying to ourselves. And then people say to me, why can't I trust my intuition? And I'm like, probably because you don't trust yourself, because you're lying to yourself, and we don't trust liars.
Yeah.
And when people think about that, they're like, oh my God, it's true. And I'm like, because then when you hear the intuition, you're like, yeah, but maybe she's lying to me. She lies to me about other things. She tells me she's okay and she's not. She tells me she's happy and she's really not, and so for me, self-care for me is like becoming a woman of your word, saying what you mean, even if it's uncomfortable, not putting yourself in danger or in harm, but at least being honest with yourself, because that way I know I can trust myself because I'm a person of my word. And for me, that's the biggest self-love. It's like knowing I have my own back. It might be uncomfortable sometimes, but I can trust myself.
Yeah.
Which means I can trust my intuition, which is why I can be like such a clear channel for my clients, because I just trust what comes to me, because why would I lie to myself?
Yeah. Beautiful. And the third thing?
Oh, the third thing, it would have to be like playing in nature. Let's do something practical, shall I? It'd be like anytime, just being surrounded by the green.
Yeah.
Being surrounded by trees. I traveled 2 hours just to go and visit a tree, like some people would visit a cathedral. I'm like, I'd say to my partner Jamie, I'd say, oh, okay, we're going to go to Wales this weekend, and before lockdown, and he'd be like, oh, what tree are we going to visit? I was like, I know. And I was like, well, actually, these trees have just been uncovered from the sea in Aberystwyth, and I'd take the family off to go to the beach because I went to see the trees that had just been uncovered because of the storms. So yeah, he knows me very well.
I love that.
That's what I do.
Yeah, because I read on your website that you love trees.
Slightly obsessed. Yes. Even on my website, there's pictures of me in a tree. Yeah. It's like
next to a tree.
To do a tree. Yeah. Anything to do with it's a bit of a standing joke. I have people FaceTime me from different places in the world going, you love these trees, Rebecca. And I'm like, oh my God, I do love those trees. Yes.
Next time I'll try and be around a tree. But I usually talk to you at night, so it'll be a bit hard.
Like I say, I'm so lucky. So many people take photos of their trees and send them to me. Rebecca, this is a tree I always talk to on my walk, and oh, this is my favorite tree, and I saw this one and I thought you'd love it. Or you sometimes get those like funny pictures of trees in like different positions, and people, I love it. My messages are filled with trees. It's fantastic.
I love it. I love it. So Rebecca, before we wrap up, I would really love you to share with us what is setting your soul on fire right now.
Well, that would be my Witch Academy. I slightly pivoted my business the middle of this year, actually. And someone said to me once, they said, you make witches, don't you? And I was like, what? And I was chatting to my group, because we've always been very witchy, as in like working with the seasons and the cycles and like talking about magic. And they're like, oh, I wasn't a witch before I knew you, Rebecca. And I was like, really? Because I thought these were all like, witches of old.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, I've always had that teacher energy. I've always loved teaching. So I've like rebranded everything. It's like the Witch Academy for people to remember their magic. So that's what I'm loving right now. And I'm actually just putting together a series of workshops about clearing the witch wound. So if anyone's ever felt persecuted or afraid to step in their power, or felt like they can't voice or express who they are, it's like, we can just clear that. It's like, there's no reason people should still be carrying that energy today. It's like, no, let's get it done. So yes, that's what it is. I keep calling myself a crafty witch, because we get together, we make lots of craft stuff.
Oh.
So yeah, so I'm like, oh, I like being a crafty witch. So that's obviously a good witch, not a sneaky witch, but crafty. So that's what I'm loving at the moment, helping people to really remember their magic.
Oh, that sounds amazing. Crafty. That sounds absolutely amazing. I love it. I love it so much. So thank you so much for sharing your love and wisdom with us today. If people want to find out more about you and how they can work with you or become a witch with your Witch Academy, where should they go?
Well, thewitchacademy.com is where they can go and learn about the Witch Academy. But my main site is Rebecca-Anuwen.com. So that's Rebecca, traditionally spelled Rebecca, and Anuwen, ANUWEN.com. And on there, go to the blog post. If you ever want to learn more about your intuition, everything you need is there to really connect you with the importance of being able to trust yourself, the importance of being able to cut out the noise around you. So that's where I would start on my website, is go and have a look at all of the information on intuition and trusting yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I will have all your details and any recommended resources available in the show notes so people can find you and reach out to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Such a great conversation today. Thank you so much. And until next time, I love you, I believe in you, and you are worth taking that first step to the life of your dreams.